So one of the quickest rises to a title fight in UFC history, Steve Erceg, in just his fourth fight is going to be taking on Alexandre Pantoja, the champion, in Rio de Janeiro this weekend. UFC 301. I want to get your thoughts on the fight itself, kind of the X's and O's, and ultimately make a prediction. While I don't really think that Steve Erceg was a deserving number one contender fighting for a title at this stage in his career, that doesn't mean that I don't think the fight's going to be very competitive. And I don't think that Steve Erceg actually does have some ways to win this fight. So the main key components to me are going to be his really good long striking that he implemented that we saw against Matt Schnell. And we also see sort of an increase in power. We saw him show us that not only does he have the skills as far as the timing and landing the punches and the kicks and stuff are concerned, but he also now can put together the power to finish fights, which is going to be very interesting. But then on the flip side of that, you have Pantoja, who has almost twice as many fights as Erceg has in total. He's fought the who's who at 125 over the last couple of years. The strength of schedule isn't even in the same stratosphere, and he's got some of the best jiu-jitsu at 125, if not the best. So what are some ways that you see each man having some success, and then ultimately, what's your prediction?
Well, you know what? Oddly enough, I do like this fight, and I think that Erceg on paper, of course, probably doesn't deserve a title. He's not a megastar, and he's only had 3 fights in the UFC, but as fans and as people that watch the UFC, we know this is very much a what have you done for me lately type of industry. And the way he looked against Matt Schnell was really great. It was basically a flawless performance. And he proved to us in one short fight that didn't even go the distance that he's got some serious power. His striking is probably sitting at the very top of all the other skilled strikers at 125. And he seems to be a good, formidable opponent for Pantoja, even though he doesn't have the strength of schedule or even the length of schedule that most people have to go through and have to endure on their way to the top of the UFC. And when you talk about Steve Erceg, you have to look at things like his striking and the way he was able to find the openings and stay very composed against Matt Schnell. We don't have a ton of stuff to go off of as far as his UFC credentials go because, like I said, he's only had 3 fights here, and it's kind of hard to go back and look at old footage and compare it and consider it to be the exact same thing when you're talking about the UFC and especially the highest level because it's a whole different ballgame at this point. And we haven't seen him go 5 rounds. So I don't really think that 125ers generally have to worry very much about cardio or having a gas tank. They're speed demons, and they know how to throw volume without exhausting too much energy. Plus, they just don't have as much weight to carry around. So I think that Erceg really does have to do some of the same things that we saw him do in his last couple of outings, especially the one against Matt Schnell. And he's got to put his presence and his power on Pantoja early. He's got to play a good distant game because he's going to have a little bit of a striking advantage as well as a size advantage. He's a little bit longer and relatively good at using his range. Pantoja is very good everywhere. Pantoja can beat you on the feet. He can take the fight to the ground. He can grind out rounds and win minutes of every single round to get his hand raised in a division that generally in 5-round fights goes the distance. And I think Erceg has to be very cautious of not letting Pantoja find his openings to get the fight to the ground when he wants to. Because like I said, Pantoja will entertain some striking at times, but he does that to mix in his grappling, his level changing, and closing the range. And so for Erceg, he's got to really stay cautious, stay on his back foot, use that long jab. He seems to throw solid straight punches as the majority of his strikes. He'll kick from time to time, and of course he'll throw hooks and uppercuts. But for the most part, he's throwing really crisp jabs and crosses, and then he's even able to set up a pretty long hook at the end of some of those combos. And that's where you've got to keep somebody like Pantoja. Pantoja might be the best scrambler that we've seen in the UFC because when you look at 125, the guys are so small that in the training rooms, they have to develop even more skills to hang with the guys at 35, 45 and above, who are their training partners day in and day out. Guys that weigh 150 pounds that are able to cut to 125 are few and far between, and that's why the division's never really gotten its feet off the ground. But these guys are very skilled. They're some of the most high-skilled fighters on the planet. Mighty Mouse was looked at as one of the absolute greats of all time.
Probably the most skillful fighter we've ever seen.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that. So that's why you have to watch out for guys like Pantoja that are coming in and they know how to mix the martial arts seamlessly. And I think Erceg is a complete martial artist, but he's not as complete as Pantoja. And that's why I think his best chances are, again, to put the pressure and put the pace on Pantoja. But remember to keep your range, keep it distance, and don't let Pantoja start to implement some of his grappling, because we haven't seen a whole hell of a lot of grappling shown from Erceg yet. And while I believe he's competent on the ground, I don't know if he'll be able to escape all of the submissions that Pantoja throws at him.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting fight. A couple of statistics sort of stick out to me. One, Pantoja is 34 years old, and while he is 1 year shy of that 35 mark, which seems to be the curse for the smaller weight classes, and 125 is the smallest of the weight classes as far as men are concerned, he is older. You know, Erceg is only 27 years old, and what we're starting to see is him fill out his frame and come into his body sort of as a grown man and not a young boy, you know, adolescent fighting.
Right.
That's why we're seeing more knockdowns, more power, more strength in certain positions. So I think Erceg's going to have an advantage there. Certainly speed, all of that, it more in the sways in the direction of the younger fighter when there's a 7, 8, 9 year age gap, which Erceg will be enjoying over Pantoja. And then the other is his ability to get knockdowns. Now, one of the things about Erceg's record that's a little bit misleading is if you look at his 12-1 record, you only see 2 wins by knockout, most recently against Matt Schnell, and he had another one in the regional scene on his way up. And he's got 6 submissions all by choke. But here's the thing. This is how he sets up most of his submissions. And if you go back and watch his fights, you'll see this. He lands beautiful straight punches, kicks, and whatnot, and knocks his opponents down. Once he gets them to the ground, a lot of people would opt to sort of stay in a half guard position, follow your opponent to the ground, hips forward, and throw ground and pound strikes. And while he can do that, he actually is more apt to look for submissions and getting to the back and getting to the neck. Well, yeah, exactly. Once he gets his opponent knocked down. So if you watch a couple of his old fights, you'll see him score a knockdown, and then you'll see him seamlessly just transition to the back and lock in a rear naked choke or even a guillotine. So the one statistic to me that is a bit misleading that I don't think a lot of people realize is that 2 wins out of 12 by knockout. And a lot of people would think, okay, he doesn't have a whole lot of power in his hands, but it's just the opposite. He gets knockdowns, and then he chooses very methodically to submit his opponents thereafter, and that's why you see that 6 submissions. So don't be fooled here if Steve Erceg is able to knock Pantoja down. You know, we saw Pantoja go to war with Brandon Royval recently, and we saw him have his chin tested there, and while he still was able to get his hand raised and he looked good and showed durability, Steve Erceg now coming into his own and getting towards that 30 mark as far as age is concerned, I think he's going to be a real problem for Pantoja. I think he's going to be very powerful in this fight. I think he's going to be very prepared for this fight. Pantoja, when he strikes with you, he does come in a little reckless, a little wide open, and he throws a lot of hooks, a lot of uppercuts, and a lot of them come from wide angles, and that can be a real problem for you if you're fighting somebody who's got great straight punches.
Right.
Because the quickest distance between 2 points from me to you is a straight line. So if you have beautiful jabs and beautiful crosses and your opponent's throwing wide sort of telegraphed hooks, then you're going to get there first with your shot. And I think that's why Erceg actually does have a striking advantage. Now, can he submit Pantoja once it goes to the ground? Pantoja is one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu experts in all of 125 right now. So it's going to be easier said than done. But actually, believe it or not, my money's on the underdog here. I think Steve Erceg, even though he probably shouldn't be fighting for a title after only 3 fights in the UFC, you know, here he is. Right. He said yes when the opportunity came to be. I think he's going to show up prepared, and I think he's going to shock a lot of people. I think he's going to have the performance of a lifetime.
Yeah, he answered the phone. He said yes, and while there's not a whole lot of people that he had to compete with at 125, he was the one that stood out the most, had the best, most recent performance, and that's why he got the nod. And, you know, I credit to him. I think he deserves to be there, even though on paper it seems a little odd. You know, the only person to get a title shot faster than him that comes to mind is Brock Lesnar, but he beat out Conor McGregor McGregor, Alex Pereira, Khamzat Chimaev, the list goes on. Even a Bo Nickal's not going to, he's already had the same amount of fights, and he's not getting a title fight next.
That's actually a crazy statistic because Alex Pereira, we think about meteoric rise.
Fast
the first
track.
person that comes to mind is Alex Pereira. Well, now it's Mr. Steve Erceg.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy because he's virtually an unknown to the casuals. I mean, everybody in MMA understands that he's a force to be reckoned with at 125. And for that, I do see your point. I think this fight could end with Steve Erceg getting his hand raised. But I do have a hard time going against Pantoja. And my biggest thing with him is the weight. I think that 125 is a division where both these guys are going to have plenty of durability. They're going to have gas to go all 25 minutes. And I think Erceg might actually knock Pantoja down, but don't get too complacent with your submissions from the bottom. Don't go gung-ho after Pantoja and jump right onto the ground after you knock him down the first time. I think it would be very wise for Erceg to knock him down 3 or 4 times because you know the old adage that they say, you might have a black belt, but if I knock you down, then it turns to a brown belt. And then if I knock you down again, you're a purple belt.
Yep.
Soon enough, you're a white belt. And that's when Erceg will have the best chance to get the fight finished in the way he likes to do it. Like you said, drop somebody and then chase him to the ground, scramble for a finish, maybe get to the back and choke him out. Again, I just don't know if I see him knocking Pantoja down several times in this fight. I do see it happening at least once. But Pantoja is such a dog. He's so good at scrambling. He really knows how to find offensive positions in grappling from a defensive setting. So he can get taken down, but that doesn't mean that when the exchange ends that he's not the one getting pulled off the top. So a lot of times you have to be very cautious when you enter the ground realm with Pantoja. That's why I think Erceg, obviously his team knows this. You got to knock Pantoja down a few times before you actually jump on him and try to go for a submission against the very skilled black belt. So for me, my final prediction, I love a good story. I love when a guy has 3 fights or something like that and then gets boosted right into a title shot. But this might be a little bit too early for him. Steve Erceg's a force to be reckoned with for the next several years at 125. But for me right now, the champ is Pantoja. I think it's going to be and still all 25 minutes. But he's going to have a real thorn in his side in Steve Erceg for the entire duration of the fight.
Great prediction.